My son told me moving to the basement was temporary. Days later, strangers were sleeping in my bedroom upstairs. That betrayal lit a fire in me I never thought I had. My name is Diana. Before I tell you what happened, let me ask, where are you watching from today? I always like knowing who's listening because this story, it isn't easy to tell. Maybe you've been through something similar, maybe you haven't. But either way, I hope it finds you at the right time. I'm 72 years old, a widow, and I thought I had lived enough life to know what heartbreak felt like. I thought I had weathered every storm. But nothing, not even losing my husband, prepared me for the kind of pain my own son would bring into my life. Mark, my only child, my miracle baby after years of doctors telling me I couldn't conceive. I poured every ounce of love and energy into raising him. Nights I stayed up sewing his school costumes. Mornings I worked double shifts, just so he wouldn't feel less than any of the other kids. I was mother and father, cheerleader and nurse, teacher and friend. When my husband Richard passed 10 years ago, Mark was the one who promised me, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll always look after you." Those words became my anchor. I clung to them whenever loneliness crept into the house, whenever the silence after Richard's death felt unbearable. For years, it seemed true. Mark called often, visited on weekends, helped with little repairs. He'd pat my shoulder and say, "You've done so much for me, Mom. Now it's my turn." I believed him. I wanted to believe him, which is why, when he suggested I move into the basement, for just a short while, I didn't question it too hard. He said the upstairs bedroom, my bedroom, the one Richard and I had shared for nearly 35 years, needed renovating. Fresh paint, new windows, updated wiring. He promised me it would be beautiful when it was done. I remember standing in that room, the light filtering through the lace curtains I had hemmed myself, thinking how strange it was that he wanted to fix it. The walls were fine, the windows still opened smoothly, but I brushed away the doubt. It's his way of caring, I told myself. The basement wasn't terrible, at least at first glance. It had a small bed, a lamp, and a narrow slit of a window that looked out onto the driveway. I carried down a few photo frames, Richard in his fishing hat, Mark as a toddler with ice cream smeared on his cheeks. I told myself it was temporary, a few weeks at most. Still, the first night down there, I lay awake listening to the creaks of the house above me. It felt like I'd been tucked out of sight, like a box someone puts in storage. I missed the warmth of the upstairs room, the way the morning sun would wake me gently. Down here it was damp, the air always carrying a faint smell of mildew. Mark popped his head in now and then, cheerful as ever. "How's it going, Mom? You comfortable?" I'd smile and say yes, because that's what mothers do. We swallow our unease. We tell ourselves our children mean well. But in the back of my mind, a tiny voice whispered, "Why now? Why change something that wasn't broken?" I ignored it. After all, this was Mark, my son. The boy I had once carried on my hip. The boy who cried when I sent him to his first day of school. The boy who had clung to me at Richard's funeral. Surely he wouldn't deceive me. Or so I thought. The first week in the basement, I tried to tell myself it was an adventure. I even joked with my neighbor, Margaret, that I had moved into a college dorm at 72. She laughed, but I could tell she thought it odd. "Renovations?" She raised an eyebrow when I told her. "That room of yours is prettier than anything in those home magazines." She wasn't wrong. Richard and I had spent years making that bedroom our little sanctuary. The wallpaper was a soft cream, patterned with tiny blue roses. The oak dresser still gleamed when the sunlight poured in through the windows. I couldn't imagine why it needed redoing, but Mark insisted. "Mom, you deserve better," he said with that confident tone of his. "New wiring, fresh paint, maybe even a new ceiling fan. Trust me, you'll love it." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to see his eagerness as care, not calculation. But I noticed little things. How he avoided eye contact when I asked what colors he planned to paint. How he brushed off my questions with, "Don't worry about it." The basement itself was a far cry from the cozy life I was used to. The ceiling hung low enough that I had to duck in one corner. My knees ached climbing the narrow stairs. There was only one small bathroom, with tiles that always felt damp under my feet. At night, when I turned off the lamp, shadows crawled along the concrete walls. Still, I tried. I folded my quilts neatly, set my teacups on the dresser Mark had shoved against the wall, and whispered to myself, "It's just a few weeks." But the unease grew. One evening, as I sat knitting in my little chair, I heard footsteps above me, heavy boots pacing back and forth. It was past midnight. I frowned, wondering what Mark was doing awake. The next morning, when I asked, he said he'd been moving things around. His explanation was too quick, too practiced. "Are you sure everything's all right up there?" I pressed. "Mom," he sighed, "trust me. This is all for you." His words sounded warm, but his eyes flickered away from mine. Then came the day he carried a padlock down to the basement. "Just for safety," he explained, installing it on the basement door from the upstairs side. My stomach twisted watching that lock click shut, even though he left me the key. I couldn't help but feel like a guest in my own home. I busied myself with little things, reading old novels, making tea, sorting through photo albums. But each time I walked up the stairs, I felt like an intruder stepping into a space I no longer belonged to. My home, my sanctuary, suddenly felt borrowed. 2 weeks passed. Mark barely spoke of the renovations anymore. No paint cans, no workers, no signs of improvement, just vague promises. When I asked when I could move back upstairs, he kissed the top of my head like a parent quieting a child and said, "Soon, Mom, just be patient." That kiss stung more than comforted. I began noticing how he lingered on his phone, whispering in the kitchen late at night. Once I heard him chuckle. "Yeah, it's all set. She's fine downstairs." The she was me. I knew it. And yet I swallowed my questions, afraid of what the answers might be. Because here's the truth. Mothers don't want to believe their children are capable of cruelty. We spend so many years protecting them from the world. We forget to imagine we might need to protect ourselves from them. The longer I stayed in that basement, the more it felt like exile. I'd sit at the little window, watching neighborhood kids ride their bikes, hearing the birds in the morning. But I was trapped in a damp silence below. A silence filled with doubt. Something wasn't right. And though I couldn't prove it yet, I felt it deep in my bones. This wasn't temporary. This was the beginning of something far more painful. It was a Thursday night when the truth first cracked open. I'd gone to bed early in the basement, the chill creeping through the concrete floor into my bones. Sometime after midnight, I was stirred awake by voices, muffled at first, then clearer, as I crept halfway up the basement stairs. Laughter, a man's laugh, rough and unfamiliar. Then a woman's voice. "This place is perfect, cozy, great lighting." My heart thudded. Cozy? Great lighting? She wasn't talking about the basement, that was certain. I pushed the door open just a sliver. Through the crack, I saw them. 2 strangers standing in my hallway, suitcases at their feet. Mark was with them, smiling like a salesman. "And here's the bedroom," he said, sweeping open the door to my room, my bed, my dresser. The very curtains I had hemmed by hand. The woman gasped. "It's lovely." I felt my knees weaken. My bedroom wasn't being renovated, it was being rented. I stayed hidden on the stairs, every muscle trembling. My son, my own flesh and blood, had turned my sanctuary into a business deal, and he hadn't even had the decency to tell me. The next morning, I confronted him. My voice shook as I asked, "Mark, who were those people last night?" He barely blinked. "Tenants, just a couple renting the upstairs room. It's no big deal, Mom." "No big deal?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "That's my bedroom. You said it was being renovated." He rolled his eyes, like I was the unreasonable one. "You're overreacting. The house is big enough. You don't even use half of it. Why shouldn't we make some extras? Money." I stared at him, the weight of his betrayal pressing on my chest. "We. This is my home, Mark." Mine. For a moment I thought he'd soften, that some flicker of guilt would show in his face, but instead he shrugged. Look, bills don't pay themselves. You should be grateful. This helps us both. Grateful. That word landed like poison. I had worked my entire life to build this home. I had paid every mortgage check, scraped together money for repairs, painted walls, planted roses in the garden, all while raising him. And now he wanted me to be grateful for being shoved into the damp basement while strangers slept in the bed where I once lay beside my husband. I couldn't find words. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. All I could do was retreat down those narrow stairs, each step heavier than the last. That night I heard the new tenants laughing in my room above, a sound that once meant comfort. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the ceiling fan, now felt like knives. I pressed my pillow to my ears, but the betrayal was louder than any noise. The days that followed blurred together. The couple settled in upstairs, cheerful and polite, but their very presence was a constant reminder that I'd been pushed aside. They walked the halls that once carried my footsteps, opened the drawers I had lined with lavender paper. My house no longer felt like mine. I wanted to scream, to demand Mark fix this. But each time I tried to speak, he silenced me with logic twisted into chains. Mom, you don't need that much space. Mom, you said you were comfortable downstairs. Mom, why are you being so difficult? I began to doubt myself. Was I being difficult? Selfish? Should I just accept it? That's the cruelest part of betrayal. It makes you question your own reality. One afternoon, as I carried laundry upstairs, the new tenant smiled at me and said, "It's so sweet of you to let us stay here. You must love having company." Company. That word hollowed me out. They thought they were doing me a favor, bringing life into my house. They had no idea they were living in the ruins of my trust. That evening, I sat on the edge of my narrow basement bed, staring at the photo of Richard on the dresser. His eyes, frozen in that gentle smile, seemed to ask the question I was too afraid to answer. How did it come to this? I whispered into the dim air, "What happened to our boy?" For the first time, a cold truth crept into my heart. Maybe this wasn't about helping me or even paying bills. Maybe Mark didn't see me as his mother anymore. Maybe he saw me as an obstacle, and that realization was only the beginning. The weeks that followed were a lesson in humiliation I never imagined I'd live through. At first, I tried to keep my head high, telling myself the renters upstairs were temporary. But temporary has a way of stretching its fingers until it feels permanent. Their laughter filled the halls where my husband's voice once echoed. Their shoes sat neatly by the door where Richard used to leave his boots. And my son treated me less like a homeowner and more like a tenant of his. I noticed how he began intercepting the mail. The first time, I thought it was an accident, letters left unopened on the kitchen counter. But soon he stopped leaving them at all. When I asked, he waved a hand saying, "Bills and junk mail, Mom. Nothing for you to worry about." I bristled at that. Nothing for me to worry about. I'd managed my own affairs for decades, balanced checkbooks, filed taxes, and made sure every utility was paid on time. But now, Mark acted as if I were a fragile child who couldn't be trusted with an envelope. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find him speaking with one of the tenants. "Don't mind my mom," he said, chuckling. "She's set in her ways." I froze. He said it so casually, like I wasn't standing right there, like I was some nuisance, not the woman who had raised him single-handedly. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Mark's smile faltered. "I just meant, your traditional mom. No offense." But the damage was done. The tenants began to look at me differently after that. They were polite, yes, but distant. Once, when I was dusting the banister, one of them handed me their mug and said, "Could you rinse this out when you're done?" They mistook me for the help. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them this was my house, that every nail, every brick, every rose in the garden was here because of me. Instead, I rinsed the mug. my hands shaking as the water ran over it. At night, I lay in the basement listening to footsteps overhead. They no longer belonged to family. They belonged to strangers who had more claim to my bedroom than I did. The thought was unbearable, and yet there I stayed, afraid of rocking the boat, afraid of losing what little connection I still had with Mark. But the cracks grew wider. He started controlling what groceries came into the house. "No need for you to go shopping, Mom," he said one morning, keys jingling in his pocket. "I'll handle it." I opened the fridge later to find shelves stocked with food I'd never buy, food that didn't suit my health or taste. When I asked where the tea bags were, he shrugged. "Forgot. You'll survive without tea for a day, won't you?" It wasn't forgetfulness, it was control. Little by little, the choices I had always made for myself were slipping out of my hands. One afternoon, I overheard him in the living room talking on the phone. "She's fine," he said, his voice low but audible. "Doesn't complain much. Basement's good enough for her." My blood went cold. Basement's good enough for her, as if I were a stray dog he'd given a blanket to. That night, I sat in the dark with Richard's photo again. "He doesn't see me anymore," I whispered. "Not as his mother, not even as a person." The erosion was slow, yes, but steady. I began to notice how he locked the upstairs cabinets, how he kept the house keys in his pocket instead of on the hook by the door, how decisions about repairs and finances happened without me even being informed. The final straw came one Saturday morning. I was watering the garden when a neighbor I'd known for years stopped by the fence. "Diana," she said cautiously, "I didn't want to intrude, but do you know your son's renting rooms out? I saw an ad online for your place." My heart dropped. "An ad?" She nodded. "Yes, multiple rooms, not just one." It said, "fully available." Fully available. The words buzzed in my ears like a swarm of wasps. It wasn't just my bedroom. He was preparing to turn my whole house into a rental property. I thanked her, forcing a smile, but inside, my stomach churned. When I went back inside, Mark was at the table, scrolling through his phone. I wanted to grab it, to demand answers, but I didn't. Not yet. Because for the first time, I realized this wasn't only about losing a room. This was about losing my life, piece by piece, to the very person who was supposed to protect it. The day everything shifted was one of those deceptively bright mornings, the kind where the sunlight fools you into thinking all is well. I brewed the last of my tea leaves in the basement, sat at the tiny table, and tried to pretend the steam rising from the cup was enough to calm me, but my chest ached with unease. The neighbor's words wouldn't leave my head. Multiple rooms, fully available. When Mark left for work, I crept upstairs. My knees protested as I climbed the stairs, but adrenaline carried me. I needed answers. I needed proof. On the hallway table, his laptop glowed, lid half open. For years, I had respected his privacy, never once peeking into his things. But that morning, I crossed a line I never thought I would. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid, and there it was, the listing. Bold letters. Spacious family home for rent. Perfect location. Multiple rooms available. Photos of my bedroom, my kitchen, my garden with Richard's roses, all advertised as if I were nothing more than a shadow in the basement. I scrolled further. My heart thumped harder with each click. Notes about long-term rental options, even inquiries from potential tenants, and then an email draft. My breath caught as I read it. Yes, my mother stays in the basement. She's elderly but quiet. She won't be a problem. Won't be a problem. I sank into the chair, my hands gripping the table so hard my knuckles whitened. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a liability, an obstacle, something to be managed, minimized, hidden away. That was the moment the fog lifted. I saw Mark clearly, not as the boy I'd raised, not as the man who promised to care for me, but as someone who had chosen greed over blood, comfort over love. And then came the second blow. Later that afternoon, when I stepped into the garden for air, my old friend Janice stopped by. She leaned over the fence, her face etched with concern. "Diana," she whispered, "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I overheard Mark at the coffee shop yesterday. He was bragging to a friend about selling the house. Said it would be easy because you were already tucked away downstairs." The world tilted. Sell the house? Behind my back? I felt my knees wobble and Janice reached out, steadying me. "Are you sure?" I managed to croak. She nodded grimly. "I know what I heard." I stumbled back inside, heart pounding in my ears. It was worse than I thought. Renting rooms was one thing, but selling the house, my house, meant stripping me of everything I had built, everything Richard and I had worked for. It meant erasing my very place in the world. That night, lying in the damp basement bed, I stared at the ceiling until tears blurred my vision. I heard the tenants laughing upstairs, Mark's footsteps pacing, the creak of the front door closing as he went out. And in the silence that followed, clarity settled over me like steel. I whispered into the dark, "No more." I had spent my life giving, forgiving, excusing. I had sacrificed, endured, believed. But there comes a moment, whether you are 72 or 22, when you realize silence is its own betrayal. So I began planning, quietly, carefully. The next morning, while Mark was out, I retrieved the box of important papers I'd kept hidden in the basement, a habit Richard and I had developed after his heart attack years ago. Birth certificates, the deed to the house, old financial documents. Thank God I had never handed them fully over. I called an old lawyer friend Richard had trusted, explained everything in hushed tones. He didn't gasp in surprise. Instead, he sighed, as though he'd heard this story before, from other mothers, other fathers betrayed by the very children they raised. "Diana," he said gently, "you still own this house. You have every right to decide what happens to it. If he's making moves without your consent, it's time to take action before he does something irreversible." Take action. Those words lit something in me. For so long I had been passive, waiting, hoping Mark would come to his senses. But hope was a luxury I could no longer afford. Over the next week, I moved in silence. I gathered every document, every account number. I spoke with the lawyer again, setting things in motion, and each time I looked at Mark, smiling as though nothing was wrong, I felt a strange calm. He thought he had outmaneuvered me. He thought I was weak, too old, too naive. But he had underestimated the strength that comes when a woman has nothing left to lose. That was the moment I knew I had to take back control. The house was unusually quiet the night I chose to confront him. The tenants had gone out, the laughter that usually filled the upstairs gone for once. Mark sat in the living room, scrolling on his phone, a half-empty soda can balanced on the arm of the couch. He looked so casual, so at ease, as though the home he was dismantling piece by piece was nothing more than a chessboard beneath his fingers. I walked in slowly, holding the folder I'd been preparing all week. My knees ached, but my spine felt straighter than it had in months. "Mark," I said, steady, calm. He glanced up, distracted. "Hey, Mom, you need something?" "Yes," I replied. "The truth." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I set the folder on the coffee table. The document slid out just enough for him to see the deed, the papers stamped with my name. "I know about the tenants. I know about the ad online. And I know about your plan to sell this house." For a moment, his face went pale. Then he laughed, short and sharp. "Who told you that? Some neighbor? Mom, you're blowing things out of proportion." My voice didn't waver. "Don't lie to me, not anymore." The air thickened. He shifted in his seat, trying to gather back his confidence. "Look, Mom, you don't understand. This place, it's too big for you. You don't need it. I was just trying to make things easier." "Easier for who?" I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. "You moved me into a damp basement like I was some burden to be tucked away. You rented out my bedroom, our bedroom, Richard's and mine, as though it meant nothing. And then you tried to erase me from my own home." His jaw tightened. "It's not like that. I've been handling things, paying bills, taking care of you." "Taking care of me?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You weren't taking care of me. You were taking advantage of me, and I won't let it go on another day." He stared at me, disbelief flashing in his eyes. "What are you saying?" I took a deep breath. "I've sold the house, Mark." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. His mouth fell open. "You... what?" "I sold it," I repeated, calmer this time. "The papers are signed, the money's secure, and you won't see a cent of it." He shot up from the couch, his voice cracking with fury. "You can't do that. This is my home, too." "No, Mark." I looked him square in the eye. "This was my home, mine and your father's. You never paid a single mortgage bill, never lifted a finger to build it, and now it's gone. You don't get to profit from what you tried to steal." He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "You've lost your mind. How could you do this to me? After everything I've done for you?" I almost laughed at the irony. "What you've done for me? You locked me in a basement and rented my life away. You tried to sell the only place I had left to feel close to your father. And you want me to thank you?" His anger cracked then, giving way to something desperate. "Mom, I didn't mean it like that. I was trying to secure our future. You don't know how hard it is for me." I cut him off. Don't twist this into something noble. You betrayed me, Mark, and there are consequences." He stopped pacing, staring at me with wide eyes. "What consequences?" I gathered the papers back into the folder. "I've rewritten my will. You're no longer in it." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the realization dawn in his eyes, not just about the money, but about the finality of what I was saying. He wasn't just losing the house, he was losing the mother who had always forgiven him, always excused him, always stood by him. "You can't mean that," he whispered, but I did, every word. "I've spent my whole life giving you everything, and in return, you treated me like nothing. So yes, I mean it. You'll live with the choices you made." He sank back onto the couch, his face pale, his hands trembling. For the first time, he looked small to me. Not the towering figure who had taken over the house, but the little boy who once clung to me at night, afraid of the dark. Except now, I realized, he wasn't afraid of the dark. He was the dark. I turned and walked toward the stairs. My feet were steady, my heart firm. For once, I wasn't the one retreating. At the door, I paused and said quietly, "This was the last chance you had with me, Mark, and you threw it away." Then I left him sitting in the ruins of his schemes, and I didn't look back. The house is gone now. I thought leaving it would break me, that without those walls and that garden and that bedroom, I'd feel untethered. But the truth is, the moment I signed it away, I felt lighter than I had in years. I moved into a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy. 2 rooms, a balcony that catches the morning sun, and just enough space for the things that matter. Richard's photograph sits on my dresser, his fishing hat still tilted at that same Johnny angle. My teacups line the kitchen shelf. And best of all, when I climb into bed at night, it's my bed. Mine, in my own space, with no one pacing above me, no voices telling me I don't belong. Do I miss the old house? Yes. Every rose bush I planted in that garden, every holiday dinner around that table. They were pieces of my life. But what I don't miss is the feeling of being erased inside my own home. I don't miss the damp chill of the basement or the footsteps of strangers in my room. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I wonder if Mark will ever understand what he lost. Not the money, not the inheritance, but me, his mother, the woman who carried him, who sacrificed for him, who would have given him the world if he'd only asked with love instead of deceit. There's a special kind of grief that comes with losing a child who's still alive. It isn't clean, like death. It's messy, jagged, Every memory cuts both ways, the sweetness of his first steps, the bitterness of his last betrayal. And yet, despite all of that, I don't hate him. I can't. Hatred is too heavy to carry at my age. What I feel instead is sorrow and freedom. Because here's what I've learned. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who teach us the hardest lessons about boundaries. I spent years thinking love meant giving without limit, but love without respect is just exploitation. And when respect dies, love can't survive alone. That realization hurt. It still does. But it also saved me. It pushed me to stand up, to reclaim the pieces of myself I had let slip away in the name of family. Now, in this little apartment, I've begun building a new life. I joined a book club at the library where we argue about characters like they're old friends. I planted herbs in pots on my balcony, and each morning I watch the basil leaves tilt toward the sun like they're bowing in gratitude. And sometimes I even catch myself laughing, real laughter, not the hollow kind I forced in that basement. To those of you listening, I want to say this. Pay attention to the small signs, the dismissive comments, the control over little choices, the way someone makes you doubt your own worth. Betrayal doesn't always come with a scream. It often slips in quietly until one day you realize you've been pushed into a corner of your own life. If you're in that corner now, know this: it's never too late to step out of it. Even if you're 72, even if it means walking away from someone you thought would always protect you. I may have lost my son, but I found my voice again. I found my dignity. I found peace in a place where I don't have to look over my shoulder or wonder if my space is truly mine. The other day, as I sipped tea on my balcony, a breeze carried the scent of someone's garden roses from down the street. For a moment I closed my eyes, and it felt like Richard was there beside me. Not in the old house, not in the past, but here, in this new chapter. And I realized, home isn't a set of walls or a deed. Home is the space you claim for yourself, the peace you refuse to surrender. So no, I don't regret selling that house. I don't regret rewriting my will. I don't even regret the confrontation. Because those choices gave me back the one thing I thought I'd lost forever: myself. And that, more than any house or inheritance, is something no one can take away. I may have lost a son, but I found myself again. And that I'll never regret.